if he ever ends up debating anyone on this topic, he needs to hit the books. He needs to do some research, and I want to give him the best shot possible. I wanted to talk about this guy right here, Midwestern Marxist, and originally I wasn't going to talk about Midwestern Marxist, but then he specifically called me out, and then proceeded to kind of like beat his chest, you know, about it at the same time. And then I'm like, okay, well now I have to talk because he called me out specifically. And what I mean by that is that he put out this tweet, and I quote tweeted him, and then he said something afterwards, and he was getting dragged by everybody for this tweet, but I was the only one specifically called out afterwards, and I'll show you in a second. But let me show you the original tweet. So this is a TikTok Marxist-Leninist, TikTok communist, and he posts a 1-minute video trying to explain the war in Ukraine. And to say that he got a lot of it wrong would be a understatement. So I'll explain the interaction, and then I'll explain what I believe he got wrong. So this is the video he shared.
If you want to understand the war in Ukraine, put yourself in the shoes of somebody living in the Donbass region. This is a place in eastern Ukraine containing cities like Donetsk and Lugansk, where most of the civilians are ethnic Russians who speak the Russian language. And in 2010, they voted for Viktor Yanukovych as president because he promised to bring peace between Russians and Ukrainians. But in the lead up to 2014, the US funneled millions of dollars into Ukraine in order to foment a coup and overthrow that government. And at this point, literal far-right extremist ethno-nationalist groups like the Azov Battalion started getting added to the actual Ukrainian military. And they started waging war against the ethnic Russians, including firing artillery shells at their homes. In all, 14,000 people were killed before Russia even got involved. That is the humanitarian crisis that the US created in Ukraine, and that's why Russia eventually invaded. The Donbass actually requested Russia to invade 10 times before they did. War is terrible, but remember, NATO started this war.
So let me just be clear. There is I responded to this by saying that this guy is the speed champion of lying, and I really do mean that. Because not only does he get information wrong at a rapid pace, but he also lied by omission at a rapid pace. For example, when he said in 2010, the reason why Viktor Yanukovych won is because he wanted to bring peace between Russia and Ukrainians. He doesn't get into any of the stuff about pension reform, doesn't get into any of the specifics besides that. It's just that. And you could be like, well, that's a TikTok video, but other people could call that a lie by omission, but that's like the mildest version of it. A better example would be, same question, 2010, Viktor Yanukovych wins. He wins the eastern parts of Ukraine because he wants to, quote unquote, bring peace with Russia. What he doesn't include is that in 2019, when Vladimir Zelensky was running against Petro Poroshenko, Vladimir Zelensky overwhelmingly won the eastern provinces of Ukraine. So if we're going to be talking about who better represents the Eastern Ukrainians, wouldn't we say it's the person who overwhelmingly won them in the last election, the last democratic election, which had international election monitors monitoring it, who said that the exit polling directly matched the results brought forward by the federal government of Ukraine? Anyway, that's a lie by omission, and there's a lot of them in this video, and I think a lot of information that he doesn't include kind of manipulates specifically what you're supposed to see in order to give you a narrative that if you were to have all the information available to you, you probably want to conclude to. But that's like easy peasy stuff. So let's get into more of the specifics about stuff he got wrong here. And the reason I got more into the specifics in a big Twitter post was because he got like dragged over this post for good reason, right? When a TikToker like makes a fool of themselves, the internet loves to celebrate it. And so he was making some code posts about it, just like posting memes about the war and just trying to kind of basically the usual post through it attitude. And one of the replies caught my attention because he posted this: POV, you're about to read one of the dumbest things you ever seen on Twitter in your life. First one, it's a fella. Represents the fella, represents NAFO, online troll group of, internet provocateurs in favor of Ukraine. Understandable. Okay. I stand with Ukraine. You basically, anybody who like flies Ukrainian colors. Flag emoji, Ukrainian flag emoji. Then just Dylan Burns. then it's just me. Then it's just me. Am I the only one that finds that funny? That's like the entirety of the fellas, right? Those who stand with Ukraine, flag emoji people, and then just Dylan Burns. Also, I don't know where he got this picture from. Some people were asking me, like, Dylan, do you follow the Midwestern Marxist? No, I do not follow the Midwestern Marxist. I think he, instead of going and just taking a snapshot of me, he Googled like Dylan Burns banner or header and got somebody else to take this picture of me, but I don't know who it even would be. I don't know where he got this picture, is what I'm saying. And I don't know why he didn't just take a picture himself. Putting that to the side, since he did this more direct call out, I wanted to respond to this more direct call out, but I wanted to respond to this more direct call out for two reasons. Not only because he called me out directly, and he also said another post that nobody had responded to his post with any substantial criticism, so I wanted to give him that, but also because he made a separate post saying this: someone told us that some blue check Twitter accounts want to debate Eddie. If you really want that smoke, please shoot us an email at midwesternmarks@gmail.com. We'd be happy to debate the war in Ukraine with anyone because the truth is on our side. See, the interesting thing is, and maybe I'm a scumbag for thinking this, maybe I've lost my faith in, truth and honesty. But just because, even if, let's say for a moment that the truth was on their side, that does not mean you should necessarily debate people. There is a lot of people for which the truth is on their side, and they're very, very bad. I don't know if you guys watch modern day debates much. Really good debate YouTube channel. I do a lot of work with them. I used to do a lot of collaborating with them when I hosted a lot of debates. I'll still sometimes go on their show. I've watched a lot of people debate flat earth against scientists, and the person who's debating in favor of flat earth wins because he knows how to debate. He knows how to play good word games. So even for a moment, if we were to assume that the truth was on their side, I have a weird feeling that Midwestern Marxists would not be good at even navigating the position at all. But also, on top of the fact that I don't think he's probably that good at navigating the conversation, he also doesn't have the truth on his side. And let's just show a few examples of that. But the reason I wanted to do this was also because if he ever ends up debating anyone on this topic, he needs to hit the books. He needs to do some research. And I want to give him the best shot possible, because I also sent his email over to Modern Day Debates and said, hey, he said he'll debate anyone, so I'll debate him. I'm open to debate him. I asked Modern Day Debates to set it up. He said he's willing to do it. He said anyone. I am anyone, that's for sure. And so I wanted to make sure that before possibly we had a conversation, or maybe, I don't count, and for whatever reason, he doesn't want to debate me, whoever he ends up debating, he'll have some, wiggle room to do some research, hit the books, and improve his strategy next time, because this was really a sloppy effort. Let's go through this quickly. So, starting at the beginning, he claimed that the Ukrainian government killed 14,000 people in the Donbass, that they caused the deaths of 14,000 people. Now, anybody who's been watching the show for long enough should know that that 14,000 number is the total amount of deaths in the war in the Donbass over the last 8 years. And that includes not only civilian deaths on one side of the conflict, but this includes civilian deaths on both sides of the conflict. This also includes military deaths on the Russian side of the conflict in Russian armed groups, as well as military deaths on the Ukrainian side. That means that in the video that Midwestern Marxist recorded, he pinned Ukrainian military deaths on the Ukrainian military, meaning they're supposed to heed responsibility for the deaths of their own soldiers at the hands of foreign mercenary groups like Wagner. It does not make any sense, and he just threw a big number out there without knowing the nuance of what made up that number. So that's the first part. Second part, he claimed that all of these deaths and all this damage in the Donbass happened before Russia got involved, cleverly leaving out, or just through a lack of knowledge, that Russia invaded Crimea. I think this is a basic fact. I don't know how he saw over this. that they funneled weapons into the Donbass. As much as people like to talk about the pro-Russian revolution over there, the equipment that they picked up is not weapons that you just like pick up at a police station or just doing like a normal raid on your local armory that the National Guard would have. A lot of the equipment that these rebels had could have only been acquired by a foreign backer. That is the Russian government. We also know that Igor Girkin, who became the defense minister for the Donbass People's Republic, the proxy group set up by the Russians in Ukraine, he is an FSB agent. He was also involved in the downing of a civilian airliner, which makes up, I think, 300 of the 14,000 civilian casualties, which, by the way, he put on the Ukrainians, meaning the downing of the airliner shot down by the rebels is somehow, the rebels, quote unquote, is somehow also pinned on the Ukrainian government, which is also really funny about that TikTok video. But he also doesn't include the fact that the Russian military even admitted to the fact they have military personnel. In a 2015 interview, Putin had to admit this because the government in Kiev, this wasn't because Putin was like an honest guy and he wanted to tell everybody, I got military in the Donbass. He wanted to continue to deny it, but he had to admit that he did because the Ukrainian government had captured Russian military officials in Ukraine because they were operating in Ukraine. There's also a bunch of other accusations about Russian military activity in the Donbass. This is just a few examples. Others added more examples in the replies. This is like Igor Girkin interviews that you can watch. You can go check it out yourselves. Lastly, for the last one I want to get through, and this is a really important one because I hear this all the time. And if you're a long watcher of the channel, if you've been watching the channel for a long time, you should know the idea that America fomented a coup by sending millions of dollars. I don't even know what he just says by sending millions of dollars. He doesn't specify where the dollars went to. He doesn't specify how this money was used to foment a coup. Usually the number I hear is 5 billion, right? And this is in reference to the total amount of aid that the United States has given Ukraine up until the 2022 Russian invasion. So obviously all that money can't just be for fomenting a coup, even in this wild theory, right? A lot of that money goes to like, trying to stop human trafficking or other activities, anti-corruption efforts. So in my mind, I was trying to figure out what are the millions or millions, and I was looking at the data, and the only thing I could get to was I think maybe the National Endowment for Democracy. But then I was looking at the numbers for the National Endowment for Democracy, and it looked like it was under 1 million. And so I still don't know exactly. I wish he was more specific. This is my main problem with TikTok when it comes to political consumption, is because of how fast-paced it is. You don't get any of the nuance, which not only allows people to spread disinformation very quickly by just giving you broad narratives and never specifying with evidence, but it also has left me just confused, and other people who are responding to this confused as well. So we don't know what the specifics are. But what I do know about the NAD funding is that it was under $1 million or around $1 million. And the idea that $1 million to the National Endowment for Democracy, or wherever this millions of dollars even talking about, was enough to foment dissatisfaction amongst the Ukrainian people, to make them revolt against their government, be shot by their government, stabbed by government-backed Tushki thugs, beaten with metal pipes, have screws and bolts tied to flashbangs and thrown at them and blown up, go through all of this, have the government even say, we're going to arrest you, we're going to torture you in prison, we're going to use sexual assault and rape against you, we're going to even outlaw protesting, go through all of that, and still keep going. And it was just America puppeteering from the background, really removes the agency of the Ukrainian people. And I find this problem a lot of times with especially like Marxist-Leninist types, especially certain stripes of communists, and it's just American exceptionalism in reverse. It's not that America is exceptionally great, it's that America is exceptionally evil. On one hand, America can have its national security undermined, and the national security of its allies, its communications, and all this information undermined by a 22-year-old airman who posts all this information on Discord and embarrasses the American government in front of the international community. But also, it can overthrow the Ukrainian government with $1 million. It's all powerful, but also very evidently extremely pathetic. This narrative just simply seems to exist in my mind to remove the agency from the Ukrainian people. Now, if that isn't enough to convince you, there's also the Victoria Nuland phone call. Now the Victoria Nuland phone call is talked about a lot, but how the Victoria Nuland phone call is usually talked about is like as evidence for that we're picking the new leadership of the country. And while I can talk about it another time why I don't feel that to be the case, a lot of people don't actually listen to the Victoria Nuland phone call, and I think this is part of the reason why people come to that first conclusion. But if you actually ever do sit down and listen to the Victoria Nuland phone call, who was an American diplomat who was working in the region at the time, Victoria Nuland in this phone call very clearly states, working as a U.S. official, that the American government wants the protesters, the Euromaidan protesters who are protesting against the Yanukovych regime, which was getting ready to ban protesting. By the way, American Marxist, I guess perfectly fine with a government trying to ban protesting. That's totally okay, apparently. Well, I guess it was okay for the Soviet Union and Communist China, so I don't know why I would be angry about that. The American government was advising that they accept the deal that the Yanukovych government was offering them. There was an opportunity for the protesters to keep going, keep up pressure on the Yanukovych regime, and the American government was advising that they don't do that, that they accept the deal. The protesters then completely ignore this advice that Victoria Nuland and the other person that they were talking to in the phone call offer, continue with the protests, which eventually causes Yanukovych to stick his tail between his legs, fly over to Kharkiv, then fly out of the country and flee to Russia, where he has lived, I assumed, in a bunker ever since. So this is just a few examples of what was wrong with this video and why I called it Speedline, and it's one of the main problems I have with TikTok content, TikTok political content, and I understand that TikTok is fun. Same thing with YouTube Shorts. The same problem exists with YouTube Shorts. But when you have this political content existing in such a short time frame, there's not a lot of work done a lot of times with research. There's not a lot of work done when it comes to verifying information. There's not a lot of work done when it comes to talking to experts or making sure that you have cross-references. And there's just not a lot of work done, period, for making sure that you don't lie by omission or paint a biased picture through what facts you choose to include and what facts you don't choose to include. What all that matters in a TikTok algorithm is that you serve a narrative that people like, will repost, and then put on their feeds. This is a perfect example of it. This person wanted a narrative that was against the United States policy in Ukraine, that was against the Ukrainian government, and something that was for the Russians and against NATO. So he crafted that narrative using a hodgepodge of information, some completely made up, others purposely leaving out information that was important, and this was the result. Complete and utter nonsense. Perfectly willing to talk to Midwestern Marxists about this at any time, at any place of his choosing, as long as we both have a free time slot. He hasn't responded to this. He doesn't really have to, but he said he would debate anyone. I'm perfectly willing to. I know modern day debates will reach out on my behalf. We'll see how it goes.